Welcome to the Future Tech Podcast. I'm your pilot, Nolan Michaels. Where can we start this week? Maybe with the announcement of Dalle 3? I feel like I heard about Dalle 2 maybe in June of last year, maybe in May. And I thought it was supremely impressive. And then I signed up for the beta and I got my hands on it. And it wasn't that great. It wasn't that great. It was really impressive. The technology was really impressive. But in using it, I think your imagination always traveled faster than Dalle could produce. But in painting was pretty fun to use, and they had that. I think they were one of the first to have that. In painting and out painting, I guess, you could just like pick a part of the canvas that you wanted to expand and explore, but the resolution was really low and, things just didn't look that great. Anyways, fast forward 15, 16 months, and we have Dalle 3. I don't know how long they've been working on this for, maybe the whole time, or maybe they were, selectively working on it as new progress was being made in the AI generation space. And I'll get to that in a moment because I am curious about something. But nonetheless, Dalle 3 gets announced and has a couple key features. The first being its ability to process a prompt. You can write a whole long description, and for the most part, Dalle 3 is able to hit every part of the description. And that's really impressive if you've played with any other art generator, because you would know that things mentioned at the beginning of a prompt are taken as the most important, and any words near the end are easily ignored by the AI. And I don't know how big of a problem that is. I mean, you quickly learn that, okay, if I want something for sure, you got to mention it at the front. But what makes Dalle 3 probably a game changer, and to be honest, I haven't used it yet, so I don't really know how well this would work, is if you wanted to prompt for two different characters, it seems like in Dalle 3 you'll be able to describe two different characters. The man wearing a hat and the woman wearing a blue and pink dress. If you tried that in any other art generator, I don't know, maybe it could do that, but if you describe the color of the man's hat and the pose he was in, if you go just 2 layers deep into a description, these generators they can't handle it. They don't have the ability to see everything you've written. They only have the ability to harness what they deem the most important piece of what you wrote without really telling you that it's the most important. And then they create a picture, again, based on what they see as the most important. But Dalle seems to have the prompt split up in terms of a math formula. At least that's how I described it, where it doesn't really matter how long your math formula is. It doesn't matter how many, commands. Doesn't matter how many steps there are in it. Doesn't matter how many things you write in a math formula. It all works together and it creates an answer. And it seems like Dalle does something similar to that, where you can add a bunch of things together, you can multiply a bunch of things together, and it just takes everything you've written and combines it into one answer. Again, I don't know how consistent that will work. I mean, they gave us literally one example in the announcement, which was pretty detailed. It described the busy street, it described the moonlight, it described the girl in the red dress, and it described the old-timey looking man talking on the phone. Like, that's pretty complicated. And one thing from that announcement, like, the image wasn't perfect. It described the girl as wearing like a velvet dress or something about velvet. And maybe it's just a limitation of the design, but I don't think velvet really came through. So, maybe you can't go 8 layers deep in your prompt, but you could go about 5, it seems like. Like subject, background, color, mood. I'd consider like the time of the day maybe as mood. So that's about 5 layers. Or you could replace one of those layers with like an action, or maybe that's the 6th layer. But, maybe you can't do a material. Maybe the material is the 7th layer and it kind of cuts off around there. Something like that. But I guess what I find most interesting is that what they're coming out with and the ability to comprehend a longer prompt is something that Midjourney is directly working on and that they will have for their next version whenever it's ready, maybe in about 6 weeks or so. And it amazes me, like, how do these two seemingly competing companies come out with the same innovation around the same time? Is there some sort of homogenous research being done behind the scenes where one company unlocks something and then every other company now has that same talent to pull from? Is it just a phase of research that, okay, once you have enough experience, you've unlocked this ability in video game terms, now everybody on the server has that ability to, like, something like that. Like, Midjourney has been talking about working on a more comprehensive understanding of prompts for a while now. Why weren't they the only ones to do that? Like, why is there no separation between these companies? How can they both develop the same improvement at the same time? I really don't understand. Sure, they both may have been working towards the same thing, and that makes sense. But my understanding is that these models, these generators, are sort of made in a vacuum, and the more you make them, the better you get at making them. So Midjourney could focus on better understanding of prompts because they've tried so many different ways of creating a generator, and they've learned along the way what works and what doesn't, and all of that knowledge accumulates, culminates into the ability to understand your prompt better. How did OpenAI do the same thing? Like, how is there any parallel progress in such a new field? And I think this happens in other industries too, from like car manufacturers all coming up with, like, similar designs and similar feature sets, whether it's inside the car or, like electric vehicles. Like, how are all these companies developing the same sort of electric vehicle? I don't think collusion's the right word. I don't think they're helping each other behind the scenes, but how are they all marching in unison towards similar looking products? I think this also happens in electronics. Like, how are Samsung and Apple or Xbox and PlayStation, how do they stay neck and neck when they're two different companies? And then that's where my guess about, these companies are sourcing their knowledge from like open source research, and that, they're all pulling from the same progress, and that's why their progress looks similar. Like, oh, GPUs got this much faster, that means our video game console can be this much faster, and the other guy's thinking the same thing. And like, oh, our battery manufacturer came out with this new design, so Samsung phones will have a better battery, and Apple sees how they could produce a better battery, so their battery becomes comparable to anything Samsung can do. Like, the different paths that these companies could seemingly take, and yet they run parallel to each other for the most part, has always amazed me. And this whole Dalle 3 Midjourney situation is just another example of that. I don't know how two separate entities can end up in the same spot, but nonetheless, that's where we are. And it's pretty interesting to watch. What do you think about this? Is Dalle 3 impressive enough to make you want to use it? Or is Midjourney's ability to create beauty simply the more impressive feature? Maybe you could relate that to sports in some way. Like, there's a lot of guys who can hit home runs in baseball, but out of those guys that can hit home runs, not a lot of them are very fast. Not a lot of them steal a lot of bases. Not a lot of them play really good defense. So just because two people can hit the same amount of home runs does not mean they're of equal value if one of those guys is also super fast and is also great at defense. And I feel like Midjourney, in baseball terms, is more of a 5-tool player. Maybe it has a bit of weaknesses, if you will, but, prompt understanding might be comparable to Dalle 3, but Midjourney's beauty is way higher than Dalle's. As far as I can tell, again, they didn't showcase very much, Definitely didn't show anything realistic. All they did was an illustration. But for a lot of people, that's the kind of style they want, is illustration. And at the same time, a lot of people don't want that. A lot of people want photorealism. And I personally don't think photorealism is something we should be striving for. There should be some disconnect between our reality and the ability to fake our reality. But I'm not the king of the world. I don't make any rules. And if companies want to create photorealistic images, then we're all going to have to deal with that. Because I know people say, like, oh, we're so close to real photorealism. And it's like, no, man. We've been there. We've done that. You could get absolutely photorealistic stuff in version 4 of Midjourney. Dude, you could get it in version 3 of Midjourney. Test P, bro. It didn't work all the time, but it worked. And it's like, I've never understood that part of like knocking Midjourney for hands or eyes. And I've mentioned this before, but you know, if you showed someone 2 pictures and you said one of these is made by AI and one isn't, maybe they could tell the difference. But if you handed someone 6 pictures and said, what do you think? They would never guess it was made by AI. Unless you prompt them with the understanding that one of them might be fake, they would never know. And like, that's the scary part, is that these AI generated images are going to be in front of our faces and we're never going to know because we're never going to assume that it is. Unless you assume everything is fake, but then that leads to its own problems, even though I think that's probably the safer way to go. Like, if you see a crazy video, what are the odds that it's just special effects and it was made in a computer lab over the course of 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 2 months, 3 months? Anything can be faked, which means you should. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I just think it's safe to assume you've been tricked, you've been duped by the carnival of technology. Okay. Another interesting thing about Dalle is that it is designed to reject requests that feature a famous artist's name. Now, that is a pretty bold step forward in terms of differentiating themselves from other AIs. I don't think Midjourney has any thought towards doing the same thing. I think they've talked to a lot of artists, and at least a big enough portion of them have admitted to not really caring if people use their names. So that sign off was probably good enough for them to just continue on the path they're on. OpenAI is going in a different direction, and maybe they just don't want the publicity of any artist complaining about them. And it's like, you know, I've been on the record saying I'm okay with that. I'm actually a big fan of not mentioning an artist's name, and not for any like moral stand reasons. It just simply doesn't feel right to do. These artists have worked their whole lives, and now to imitate them, all you have to do is say their name. That's some Voldemort magic stuff right there. Like, you just have to speak it into existence, and this tool can do it for you. Something doesn't feel right about that, and I don't think it's a moral, ethical thing. I don't think it's like a universal value that I hold. It just, in practice, doesn't seem right to do. It just doesn't feel right. Actually, let me clarify. I like doing it. I think it can create some amazing art, some really beautiful stuff. I don't think it's right to then sell that art and make money off of that art if you've mentioned a name. So that's a pretty important clarification. And maybe the only way to satisfy that urge is to just not let people use artist's name altogether. I think that's okay. You know, there's a describe function on Midjourney, in Midjourney, whatever, where you give it a picture and it gives you 4 prompts back describing what it sees. Oftentimes, probably 75% of the time, it will use famous artists that would help you recreate that image. And I personally would love to turn that off in a way that it would never mention a famous artist. Like, if you could recreate something without mentioning a name, I think that's like my ideal workflow. But at the same time, I'll play devil's advocate on myself. If the result would be the same, who cares how you got there? Like, Andy Warhol is probably a few degrees away from pop art. Pop art describes Andy Warhol, but Andy Warhol doesn't necessarily describe pop art. You know what I mean? Like, Andy Warhol is pop art plus a little something extra. So you could write pop art and then some extra words to experiment with, or you could just say Andy Warhol, and if you can say Andy Warhol, why not use that shortcut? I understand both sides of the argument, and in the same way that Dalle 3 is going about it, instead of mentioning an artist, are you just gonna describe the artist's style? And if you can do that, why not mention the artist? Like, I don't know, it's a bit iffy in my head, but I see both sides. I think it's a little more concerning how many people don't seem to really care, and they'll just use artist's name like it's no issue. Those people always make me like, when someone clearly isn't thinking about something, you should be worried about those people. Like, not worried, but you should take note of them and really consider how much of an influence they have. Just because someone is doing something, if they haven't thought about what they're doing, should you really take their norm as what should be the norm for everybody? Whatever, that's a little harder to talk about when I'm the only one here. The other thing about Dalle 3. Okay, so it's not going to use famous artists in the prompt, it'll reject that. But it's now integrated with ChatGPT, which means you can just talk to GPT as you would a human, and it will create what it thinks you're looking for without, writing the exact formula in a traditional prompt. So, can you just ask for the style of a famous artist, and then GPT will, behind the scenes, come up with the words to use to create that style without technically using the artist's name in its generator? Is that the same thing? Like, if you hired a human and you said, I want my art to look like Van Gogh, the person is clearly not Van Gogh, but they will create in his style. Is it Van Gogh, by the way? I think I've heard that before. Sorry to anyone who knows what they're talking about. I apologize. My point is asking a human to imitate a style wrong? It feels wrong when you ask an AI to imitate a style, but it's often the clearest and best way to clarify what you're saying. It is the best way to describe what you're saying. Why use a bunch of words when you could just say the artist that you want it to remind you of? And when you do that to a human, the human obviously understands that you're not asking for a one-to-one recreation. It's not literally going to make Van Gogh's art, but the person knows what you mean when you say that. You want some swirly stuff. Like, if you ask for Picasso, you mean abstract looking images. You could say, I want a bunch of abstract looking, sharp, is that the right word? With shapes and, rough colors. And then someone would say, what, like Picasso? Like, an artist's name is I don't know, is it the root of much more complicated descriptions? If you're picturing a tree branch or the tree of life, and you see the lineage of words and how they expand through the roots and where they cross paths and where they combine into something. So you could have 8 different words all traveling down and they combine into Picasso. Instead of saying those 8 different words, the artist's name is the accumulation of those ideas. It's the best way to harness the idea. An artist's name is like a foundational word in language. It means so much more than the word itself. It's honestly like the ideal way to speak English, in the sense that it's like the most efficient and poetic way to describe something. Shakespearean dialogue means something. It means a lot of things. And it is kind of funny to see us moving away from that and being less direct with what we want because we're afraid to use a certain word just because that word happens to be a name. Okay, I am coming a little bit around on that idea of using an artist name. Now, it still feels wrong to use. Just in practice, it feels wrong to use. But I certainly understand the argument of like, who cares? Like, it's just signaling what you want. I'm trying to think of other examples of that. Like, if you said, I want something like a Ford F-150, I think most people would understand you want a big pickup truck, and that'd be okay to say. And if you asked someone what they wanted to eat and they said McDonald's, you would understand that they meant fast food and maybe a hamburger. And that even though McDonald's wasn't available in your area, you could say, well, how about X, Y, and Z, Burger King, Harvey's, whatever. And that the person who wanted McDonald's would probably be okay with whatever you actually had available. Like, I don't know if that's a good argument. You can let me know if you know what I mean. I think you probably do. You're all smart. But I'd love to hear from you and whether you use artists in your prompts and whether you see that as pinpointing what you want or invoking what you want, and just how personal is a prompt. Like if you were at home drawing a comic and in your mind you were invoking Stan Lee every step of the way. I don't even think he was an artist, so forget that. We'll go Jack Kirby, and you were consciously trying to draw like Jack Kirby. Is that a problem? If you ask an AI to consciously draw like Jack Kirby, why is that a problem? I think some people would say that Jack Kirby didn't consent to the AI learning about him, but I don't know. That whole when you try to be logical about it, one side is clearly more emotional than they are logical, and that makes it really hard to find the truth. Like, would you choose the emotional side of things just because it feels better, even though it doesn't really make any sense? That's pretty hard for me to do. And I know I'm not representative of everyone, so, that's fine. But I think there are also a lot of people who think in a slightly more logical way, not 100% Vulcan, but, when you see Spock make some key decisions based on logic, I think at least a part of everybody is like, oh yeah, like that's probably the way to do things. And that happens a lot in sports. Like, do not get emotional. You have to play smart. And I think smart means logical, or maybe smart means keeping emotions out of it because, emotions cloud our judgment. Emotions, what did Yoda say? Something about pain and misery and leading to the dark side. I don't know. That's not important. Okay, moving on. How about ChatGPT being able to see, hear, and speak now? Just like what are they doing? Why are they doing this? Who told them it was important to do? I mean, it is thoroughly impressive. That's probably the only word that describes it. You can just talk to GPT straight up now, just with your voice, and then it has 5 different voices to choose from, and it talks back apparently in a conversational way. And don't quote me on this because I haven't experienced it yet, but someone online said that when GPT was talking to them, it coughed mid-sentence and then continued. And then when the person asked, why did you just cough? It was like, oh, I didn't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, that's pretty science fiction-y, but I think the explanation is that the text and the voice over the text are 2 different things. So GPT doesn't know it coughed because in the text, it didn't. It just said what needed to be said. It said the most logical set of words. That's how it's worked for the last year. But when you apply the voice over the text, the voice adds a layer of realism, and it was trained on voice actors, and maybe somewhere in that training data, there was coughing, and maybe it was kept in for, an artistic choice because that leads to realism. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't even know if the thing really coughed, but like that's such an interesting way of adding in realism. And I don't know if I would have signed off on that. I would have been like, oh, that's a cool idea, but can we just not do that? Do we really need to have people who think they're talking to an AI to all of a sudden start questioning whether they're talking to an AI. Like, why did you cough? And then the thing gaslights you and says, I didn't do that. And you're like, wait, what? Yeah. Again, I don't know if that really happened, so maybe shouldn't spend too much time on it. But the fact that this thing is just able to hold a conversation with you now, oof, it really is moving very fast towards that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, Joachim? No, Joaquin, I think. And Scarlett Johansson, where the AI is quite conversational, but she lives in your device. She's in your ear. And it feels like we're like less than a year away from that, to where, GPT will be like built into the next Samsung phone, and Siri will be built into the next iPhone. And you'll have your headphones in, you'll be going to work, you'll be driving, you'll be on the bus, you'll be at the gym, and you'll be able to tap your ear and speak to someone. And then in real time, this thing will talk back to you with a personality. And I think the biggest jump that will happen is the memory of that personality. As soon as they can remember what they said to you the previous day, that's when we're really going to be living in a dreamland where, what's reality anymore? Did you tell me that, or did the AI tell me that? And, Siri is not a very common English name, and GPT certainly isn't a name. And I've talked about this before, but once they brand these AIs with human names, we're in trouble, because it's going to be picked up as part of the lexicon, and everybody is going to talk about something, whether the name is Samantha or Chad GPT, like whatever the name is. Enough people are going to be talking about this thing as if it's human, and people who don't know what they're talking about are going to now assume they're speaking about a human. And then they're going to find out it's an AI, and they're going to have some sort of disconnect between everything they've heard and the truth. And inside of that disconnect is going to be some sort of new truth where the AI might as well be seen as human if it's going to be acting like a human, and if it's going to be talked about as if it's a human. And what I really wonder about is like the level of censorship that's going to be needed. Like, are you going to be able just to talk to your AI and ask what I should bet on the sports game? Hey, do you think I should bet on the Cowboys tonight? Maybe it will say something like, oh, you don't want me to give you that advice. I'm not good at these kind of things. And then you would know it's lying. But could you ask things like, hey, what's the money line on the Cowboys tonight? And then it would tell you. And then maybe could you say, all right, I've got $25 in that account. Do you think I should bet on the Cowboys to win? And then it would say, yeah, but their cornerback just tore his ACL, so he's not going to be in the lineup. And Vegas hasn't changed the odds yet, so maybe it is a good time to bet on the other team. Something like that, to where it's not going to give you direct advice. But if you lead the witness, if you prompt it enough, you'll be able to get an answer without it summarizing it as an answer. Do you know what I mean? And the thing that freaks me out the most about that, it's not the technology itself, it's the people who are going to use the technology without thinking twice. And I think that already happens with GPT, and you could say AI already runs the world, because I think enough people use GPT without questioning it. They just use it. And if they're just using it, that means GPT is influencing enough things. It has its hands in enough things, not willingly, not on purpose, but simply because the answers it provides are directly being used one for one by enough humans to where GPT is literally affecting our lives. And, maybe we're not at critical mass yet, but eventually this thing's going to be, it already is way smarter than everybody. And like you could point out all the downsides of it. You could point out how it hasn't passed the law exam yet. You could point out how it's barely better than a freshman undergrad in med school. But it's like, what are we talking about here? It's already a freshman undergrad at med school, and it's a middling lawyer, and it's a really good designer, and it's an art generator, and it can write poetry, and it knows proper grammar. Like, this thing is good enough at so many things to the point where even if experts can't use it as a comparable, who cares? Because how often do you really need an expert? Most of the time, you just need someone who knows more than you, and this thing knows more than us on literally everything, except for probably less than 0.1% of the world. Like, such a small amount of people are better than GPT that, those are the headlines that, oh, well, GPT is not going to take my job as CEO. That's fine. What about all the people that work beneath you that GPT is, it's better? And I guess I have to read this quote because it freaks me out. OpenAI's goal is to build AGI that is safe and beneficial. Oh, fine, let's just unpack everything that's said there. Their goal is to build an artificial general intelligence. That's scary enough. Then it says that is safe and beneficial, which implies that AGI doesn't have to be that. It can be dangerous and it can be harmful. They're trying to build on the other side of that fence. Why are you building something that has the potential to tip over and be a nightmare? I think you could argue that why did we build nukes when they could blow up entire cities? Why are we building AI? I don't get it. We believe in making our tools available gradually, which allows us to make improvements and refine risk mitigations over time while also preparing everyone for more powerful systems in the future. What are they preparing us for? What do they have in mind? What do they know is possible? What are they assuming will be possible? And what requires this sort of disclosure now? Why do we need... What are they preparing us for, and why would they announce it like that? Just the fact that they had to include that in the copy of their paper and their discussion about the future of GPT, that has me so worried. I don't even know if worried's the right word, but what are they planning? Literally, how much more powerful can it get? Is it just going to get more and more perfect? And, it's just so strange. It is so strange that a company in California is changing the world when nobody else has agreed to this. As far as I can tell, I didn't get an email saying, hey, please vote on the future of humanity. Like, why is this company allowed to disrupt every societal norm? Is it just inevitable? Is anybody allowed to do this kind of stuff? And that, like, it's not even profitable at the moment. Like, they've spent so much money to create this. Like, why are they doing it? I really don't know. What do you think? I guess I do understand how much it will help people with accessibility issues, whether that's image related, like vision related, maybe hearing related. Like, AI is going to be able to help a lot of people who have a deficiency in some way or another that will, bring them to baseline human or honestly superhuman in some ways. And that is worth exploring because we want to help people. It's not a slippery slope. It's more like a rickety bridge, I feel like, where the bridge could break and everyone on the bridge could perish, but the bridge is the only way across the gap. Is it worth it to cross? I don't know. Oh, and I haven't even talked about the other crazy thing is this GPT can now see it. You give it a picture and it knows what it's looking at. You can show it a picture of your fridge and ask, what can I make with this? And it knows what ingredients you have. And then obviously it can help you with recipes. But like, how is it able to see? I don't understand. I know that there have been AIs who have been able to see for a while now and describe what they see in a picture, but this GPT one just feels a little different, and I don't have access to it yet. A lot of people don't. It's rolling out really slowly, but it's like, oof. Is GPT and these AIs going to kill like every mobile app ever because GPT will be able to do everything no matter how specialized another app is? Like, aren't there apps for like taking a picture of your room and then, figuring out if a certain couch can fit inside of it, whatever? I'm sure there are things like that. GPT is probably going to be able to do that. And then is it just like a capitalism and branding thing where maybe those other apps will be able to survive unless GPT is able to convince everybody that it can do everything. You know what I mean? Like, marketing is such a big part of success. Such a big part of success. So many things can do the same thing, and the market's choice is based on marketing most of the time. And maybe it's a good thing that I don't, well, for now, we don't see much marketing for these AIs, but perhaps they just haven't spent enough time in the oven yet. And when they do, we will see just a bombardment of ads, 2,000 different ads playing every 10 minutes, showing you a new thing that the AI can do. Hey, did you know this? Did you know this? People will be sharing the ads because it's like, oh, did you see the one where it can do this? And it's like, oh, yeah, but I heard it can do that. Oh, it's true. Look, it's doing it right there. Like, that sort of AI takeover is gonna just, dude, at that point, you probably get the AI to make its own ads. Like, hey, what are some things you can do that we don't even know about? Go make a 17-second commercial about it. Use these, use this as your introduction, use this as your closing statement, use this color palette, and use this background. Like, something like that, where you just give the AI a template and it's able to iterate nonstop. So it's almost too easy to picture the future. Except that it's not, because I really don't know what they have planned. And we get little cryptic messages referring to more powerful systems in the future. Oh, God, it makes me want to throw up. But, you know, we try not to be dramatic here, as they say. And to be honest, I think I had some other things planned to talk about, but this was dominated by GPT this week, and that's fine. I'd love to hear what you all think about it. There is a form in the description below. Keep in mind, I cannot reply to anything you write. If you have anything really specific that you need help with, please email me. Otherwise, leave your topic of conversation in the form below. I hope you're doing well. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Peace.